is starting. So here we are from Juventum Global Education. And today I have the pleasure to do another interview. And a reminder to everyone who listens to this, Juventum is about global education. And I founded this organization in 2009. And just recently, a couple of months actually ago, I had the pleasure to speak with Paul Watson. And Paul Watson was and is the first prominent supporter we got for Juventum. And I also want to add, just a couple of days ago, as I did recently, or then this year, a couple or quite a number of interviews actually with people, I started to bring the interviews on an audio basis, but video basis, of course, up on different channels like Telegram, like YouTube or Rumble, and also on radio and on a website, just freetalkradio.com. And I believe for whatever reason, we are here in a moment in time. And today I have a pleasure to speak with Charlie. And Charlie is involved with the Paul Watson Foundation. But first of all, again, Charlie, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
And Charlie, as I did, and as I do it with others, let's start off with as much as you want to share a little intro from your side. And we go then directly, I think, with that in the kind of first question. And it's about, yeah, you and your personal kind of motivation or calling, why you are or have been involved with the Paul Watson Foundation.
Well, yeah, I've been a fish lover since I was a little kid, and I had the fortunate experience as a child to snorkel and scuba dive in many different reefs. And as a young kid, I had a fascination with anything that had to do with the ocean, whether it was coral reefs, octopus, dolphins, but my real passion was always coral reef fish, triggerfish, pufferfish, tangs, angelfish, you name it. I loved it as a kid, and so I ended up learning as much as I could about marine organisms. I studied business in college, but then decided to go to graduate school and did some graduate studies on coastal marine and wetland ecology. And from there, met my wife, and she was always very much into marine mammals. And so, my wife ended up working with Paul Watson, and back then it was Sea Shepherd, and I also ended up working for that organization. And Paul, I guess about a year or 2 years ago now, in 2022, he started the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. And at that time, he, I guess, was looking for folks that could help him start this foundation. And since I had had some experience in the past working with him, I was able to come on board and help out. But have always had a strong desire to contribute in any way that I can. In the course of my lifetime, I have witnessed coral bleaching. I've witnessed the lack of biodiversity on coral reefs. I've seen it with my own eyes. There's a specific coral in the Caribbean called elkhorn coral, and it's a hermatypic coral, meaning that it helps build the reefs. And those corals are dying. And having seen that, it really brings about a lot of urgency for me to want to help impact change. And Paul, Paul started Sea Shepherd back in 1977, and he started a movement. His vision was to help whales, and not just whales, but other marine organisms. And you know, it, when I was able to meet Paul and talk to him and learn more about the things that he's done, um, it really struck me that here is a very special human being on the planet that I think a lot of us, you know, don't realize the impact that he's had and that he is currently having. And I guess we can talk more about that later on. But in terms of, um, I guess the expression here in the United States is the canary in the coal mine. Someone that is speaking out against, the dangers of environmental collapse and the importance of biodiversity and species richness. Paul's been at the forefront of that. Paul has, for a long time now, tried to protect all these key species. And I guess because I've had the fortune to see some of these ecosystems myself and seen how unbelievably intricate they are and how magical they are, I would like to be a part of protecting that too. And so, yeah, I guess personally, that's sort of why, I have gotten involved and why I, support Paul and the work that he's doing and just really want to help Paul achieve his goals. And I know one of his goals is to end commercial whaling, which, whales are so important to the oceans that if as humans, if we can't protect whales, then what can we protect? I mean, these are some of the most magical, incredible creatures in the sea, and they deserve our respect and our attention. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I can see that the oceans need our protection, and Paul is one of the few people on this planet that's willing to stand up and say, we're running out of time and we need to do something. Lots of politicians and people want to talk and talk and talk about solutions. Well, Paul wants to act. Paul wants to make change. Paul wants to do something about it, as opposed to just talking about change. And that's what makes Paul so special. And, I think that's why the Captain Paul Watson Foundation is something that he's very excited to have started, because he wants to continue this movement that that he envisioned many decades ago.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie, for giving that background and your perspective and experience. And yeah, let's go into the second question, because therefore we are kind of having this interview, because I thought, as I said to Paul in our interview we did that a couple of weeks ago, I said, hey, can I interview, in other words, you again? And the situation is now that we do this interview because Paul is basically in a situation we have to talk about, I think, at least. And so I want to ask you, Charlie, what can you share about the situation Paul is in?
Yeah. I think it's best to start at the beginning and,
Sure.
where did all this come from? And so back in 2010, Paul and his crew were down in the Southern Ocean trying to protect whales from the Japanese whalers. And, there was a confrontation that took place down in the Southern Ocean. And the Japanese have been embarrassed by Paul Watson because the TV show Whale Wars brought global attention to the whaling practices of Japan. And because of the Whale Wars show, the Japanese had to back away from their whaling aspirations because a lot of country leaders and other governments were condemning the whaling actions of the Japanese in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. So back in February of 2010, uh, Paul was down there. There was a few ships. One of the ships was the Addie Gill. That particular ship was a small vessel, looked sort of like the Batmobile out of the movies, a small, fast vessel. And that ship was sliced in half by a Japanese ship called the Shonan Maru. And so when that ship was sliced in half, the captain of that ship, Peter Bethune, he decided to board the Japanese vessel and confront the captain of the Japanese boat about the sinking of his ship, basically saying, "Hey, you sunk my ship. You owe me to, either replace the ship or something to that effect." So there was a confrontation in the sense that the Sea Shepherd boats had some small inflatable boats, and they were throwing stink bombs onto the Japanese vessel, which is butyric acid. It's harmless, but at any rate, the Japanese were claiming that these stink bombs had, smashed near their crew, and that some of the crew members were injured from the stink bombs. So that's one of the charges against Paul is for bodily injury that relates back to the stink bombs. So Japan is putting, and I guess let me back up one more step too, is that Paul currently is in a prison in Nuuk, Greenland. He was arrested by Danish police, so police sent from Denmark to Greenland to arrest him. And he's been there since July. And the whole reason Denmark arrested Paul is because of Japan issuing a red notice, an Interpol red notice to arrest Paul that dates back to these charges that I'm talking about from this incident in 2010. So ever since 2010, Japan has been wanting to get their hands on Paul. Now, the Interpol red notice that had been issued against Paul, Paul and his lawyers had thought that had expired because we're talking about an incident that took place 14 years ago. And so Paul has been able to travel amongst other countries without issue. And yet it seems like sometime prior to July, the Japanese had reissued this notice and kind of nudged Denmark to say, "Hey, Paul is going to be stopping his boat in Greenland to refuel. We would like you to arrest him." And Denmark took them up on that. So Japan has issued this red notice. And what I was speaking about earlier, there's a few charges that they've brought against Paul. One of them dates back to that incident where they're saying that he ordered people to throw stink bombs onto this vessel. The video evidence that Paul has regarding that incident shows that where the stink bombs landed on the deck of the ship, there weren't any crew members there. So no one could have gotten harmed by these stink bombs. However, the video evidence also shows that there were some Japanese crew members that had pepper spray guns, and they were trying to spray the pepper spray down on the inflatable boats, and wind had pushed the pepper spray cloud back into their own faces. So they effectively pepper sprayed themselves, and you can see them in the video rubbing their eyes immediately because they've injured themselves. And so what we think is going on is whatever blister or whatever the Japanese crew member got from this pepper spray, they are claiming that that was from the stink bombs that the Sea Shepherd crew members had thrown. So the video evidence would show that that particular claim is false. And the judge in Greenland, when Paul has been before the judge, has refused to see the video evidence that Paul and his lawyers have. They've only looked at video evidence from the Japan side. And so, Paul has been patiently awaiting, his opportunity to show all of the footage, because this was a TV show. So there's lots of footage from lots of different angles for different things. And so that's the first one. The first one is that Paul ordered this and that it caused bodily injury, which again is false. The second thing is trespassing onto the boat and causing property damage. So Peter Bethune, when his ship was sunk, he decided to board the Shonan Maru #2. And in doing so, he cut some nets to get up onto the boat, and he trespassed on the boat. Now, Paul never ordered Peter to do that. Peter did that on his own volition. The Japanese then, once Peter was on their boat, basically took him captive and took him back to Japan. Peter ended up in the Japanese prison. And in Japan, basically you get interrogated until you confess to whatever they want you to confess. So Peter Bethune spent months in a Japanese prison in very awful, harsh conditions. And he came to realize that if he didn't agree to what the Japanese wanted him to agree to, that he would probably spend years in Japanese prison. So Peter, to help himself and get out of jail, agreed to say to the Japanese prosecutors that Paul had ordered him to, get on the Shonan Maru. Now, once he did that, the Japanese said, "Great, we got your confession. You can go now." And they let him go. And then as soon as Peter got out of prison in Japan and was back in New Zealand, or I think he's from New Zealand, he quickly then said, "Hey, by the way, Paul never asked me to get on the boat. I just did that so that I could get out of Japanese prison." So, and that's online. Peter made a video. He basically said, "Look, I had to confess to this. Otherwise, I would have been in this Japanese prison for a long time." And it was a horrific experience, from his point of view. So that's another charge against Paul, is that he ordered Peter to get on the ship, which again is not true. And then the other charge against Paul from Japan has to do with conspiracy. And basically, there's this idea that Paul impeded commerce by stopping the Japanese from whaling. Now, the issue with this is that the Japanese have been whaling as what they say is scientific research. Back in the 80s, when the International Whaling Commission made a moratorium on whaling, they left this small little part or article in the rules that said, if you're a scientist from a specific country and you need to, quote unquote, take whales or, kill whales for scientific purposes, you can do so. And so Japan read that and used it as a loophole then to say, well, when we go out and kill whales, we're doing it for scientific purposes. So it's not commercial whaling. However, if you go back to the charge says that Paul is impeding commerce, which is commercial whaling, commerce being business, the business of whaling. And so the Japanese can't have this both ways. If the whaling is scientific, then Paul can't be impeding commerce. If the whaling is commercial, then they need to admit that they are not, killing whales for scientific reasons. They're killing whales for profit. So, that's another charge that's out there. Paul has not been able to show the evidence that he has that would, anyone seeing it would say, okay, well, he obviously didn't do these things, so you guys need to let him go. Currently, the situation is that, like I said, Paul was arrested in July. He's been in front of the judge in Greenland, I believe, 6 times since July. And it really all comes down to this Danish minister of justice. His name is Peter Hummelgaard. And from what I understand, um, Minister Hummelgaard is going to be looking at evidence, and then he will make the decision as to whether to extradite Paul to Japan or whether to let Paul go. So, that it sounds like the judge in Greenland is deferring to the Danish government. Basically, the judge in Greenland is saying, we don't have anything to do with this. We're just holding Paul Watson until you guys make a decision. Now, one thing I guess I should say for your listeners that don't know is that Denmark is connected to the Faroe Islands, right? I mean, the Kingdom of Denmark includes the Faroe Islands and Greenland. And in the Faroe Islands, they kill whales. They kill about 1,100 pilot whales and dolphins every year. They kill Atlantic white-sided dolphins, and they kill long-finned pilot whales. So Paul has, gone to the Faroe Islands and has tried to stop them from killing marine mammals. They call this practice the grind or grindadrap, where basically they use sounds to drive pilot whales and dolphins from the open waters as they pass by their island into a harbor. And because these animals are so social and so connected, these pods, these family units, they stick together. So when if the leader kind of goes towards the shore to get away from this wall of sound that they create with their boats and making a racket, they basically beach themselves on the shore, at which point the town will come down and kill them. And it's brutal to watch. It's awful. You can hear the whales crying. You can hear them just disoriented. It's not a quick death. If you Google Grindadrap, you can watch videos on it. It's very disturbing. But basically, my point is that Denmark has a part in killing marine mammals and killing whales, just like Japan does. And so Japan, I think, and the Faroe Islands, for that matter, would prefer to see Paul stay in jail, because if Paul is in jail, I think their thinking is that, no one can stop us from killing whales, and no one's going to film us whaling. And so we can do as we please outside of the public eye. Now, Japan's strategy in that sense has backfired, and Paul pointed this out. By them arresting Paul, there has been quite a big media following. News organizations have gone to Nuuk, Greenland to interview Paul. And so there's been this bright spotlight put on Japanese whaling because people are interviewing Paul in prison. So their strategy sort of backfired in the sense that if they were trying to resume whaling without people knowing about it, and they thought, well, let's just throw Paul in prison and then people won't know what we're doing. Well, that's not the case. I mean, now that they've captured Paul, there's pressure being put on Denmark to release Paul. And everybody knows that the reason Denmark has Paul is because Japan is putting enormous pressure on them to extradite Paul. The Japanese legal system, as I said with Peter, is very harsh. And, they have, I think, a 98 or 99% conviction rate. So if Paul is extradited to Japan, he would, be found guilty, and most likely would spend the rest of his life in jail. Paul is 74 years old. And so it is a very scary thought that if Paul is sent to Japan, that we may never see him again. And the thought of that is quite awful. And so Denmark, especially this Minister of Justice, Peter Hummelgaard, has a really big decision to make. And we're hoping that he makes the right decision. Paul is an environmental hero. Paul is trying to save not just Wales, but our planet. And if Denmark decides to give Paul to Japan, then that would speak volumes about what's important to Denmark. It sounds like Japan is putting economic pressure on Denmark. It sounds like Japan is also putting a lot of pressure on France. President Macron has come out and supported Paul and has said some things to the people over in Denmark that they should let Paul go. And it sounds like Japan is, trying to retaliate to some degree with France, saying, "Hey, we're not going to do certain things if you guys keep supporting Paul." So there's a lot of political pressure going on right now, and hopefully, like I said, Denmark can do the right thing, and I mean, at the very least, hopefully the Minister of Justice specifically will look at the actual evidence from this actual incident that happened again 14 years ago in 2010, and will say that these charges are absurd, and Paul should be set free. It's important to note also that um, in Denmark, the things that Japan is charging Paul with, if Paul were found guilty of that in Denmark, his lawyers had said it would amount to a $600 fine, and he would just have to pay the fine, and then he'd be free to go. And my understanding of extradition is that you can only extradite someone if the charges are quite serious. And the other important thing is that no one's going to extradite someone if it's a politically motivated charge. And that's exactly what we have with Japan, is that they are politically motivated to go after Paul because they are embarrassed that his, TV show and his actions shine the light on their illegal whaling activities down in Antarctica. And ever since then, they've been trying to figure out a way to get their hands on him so that he can stop putting this spotlight on them. Japan recently built a brand new whale factory ship for whaling. And so they wouldn't spend all that money on a new factory ship if their intentions weren't to ramp up killing whales. And so I think the timing of all this speaks volumes because their ambitions are to kill more whales, and they know that if Paul is on his ship, that he will find them and he will make sure that the world knows what they are doing. So I hope that gives you a good, I guess, overview of the situation that Paul's in.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I will say, everyone should listen carefully to the details. In general, I would say it can be sometimes quite complicated how things evolved, have been, and what, so to say, something might be then the right measures, consequences, and so forth. But let me hold back still a little, and let's try to get into what we spoke about before. I thought we keep it a little open, and I just want to say again, this is, again, free talk radio, where I will also publish, so to say, this kind of interview we are doing here, Charlie. And in terms of the openness, yeah, I would ask you, what do you think? What do you think in the best case you would like to see with this talk or interview we have coming out of this?
Well, absolutely. The biggest thing right now is that people know about Paul's situation. Paul has spent his life trying to protect the oceans. Since starting Sea Shepherd in 1977 and then to present day starting the Captain Paul Watson Foundation in 2022, he has tried to protect biodiversity on our planet. He has tried to allow future generations to enjoy whales and enjoy harp seals in Canada and many other organisms that roam the seas. That's been his passion and that's been his goal. I think collectively, the world owes Paul a debt of gratitude. And right now, Paul is in a prison, and more than anything else, he needs our voices. If the people listening to this can do what they can and use their own talents to share this message that Paul is in prison and that Denmark is holding Paul and that Japan wants to throw Paul in prison for the rest of his life, that would do the most good for Paul. I don't think that Denmark will follow through with extraditing Paul if they know that that decision will be looked upon poorly by the rest of the world. But they have done their best to try to keep this under wraps so that people can express their outrage. So, yeah, there's a few different things that people can do. But let me back up. One of the things that Paul always says, is for people to use their imaginations and for people to use their talents to help change the world and do things that they're passionate about. So people listening, they might know people in news media outlets that they could contact and talk about Paul and educate people about Paul's plight. There could be government officials that people know. There could be someone listening to this right now that has a YouTube channel and they can talk about Paul and talk about the importance of the environment. So whatever those things are, if the oceans are important to you and whales especially are something that you care about, then anything that anyone can do to magnify this voice for Paul, that the planet is a better place with Paul being a free man and with Paul being able to continue his mission to protect the oceans, that would be the best outcome for our conversation today. Specifically, though, if people do want to directly get involved, they can email the Danish Minister of Justice, Peter Hummelgaard. His email is jm@jm.dk. And, basically you could just share a polite message to Minister Hummelgaard expressing the frustration that Paul has been kept in prison since July. Certainly his human rights are being violated. But further, though, that Paul is an environmental hero and that the charges brought forth against Paul by Japan are not correct and absurd, and that Paul should be allowed to be free. And if people can email him, that's great. Another option is on social media. You can use the hashtag #FreePaulWatson on social media posts to help generate awareness. And you could also, our foundation is paulwatsonfoundation.org, O-R-G. So if you go to paulwatsonfoundation.org, you can find out more information about ways to help. There's a petition you can sign. You can write Paul a letter in prison. That address is on our website. So there's different ways that people can help, but yeah, the biggest thing right now is, you know, Paul just needs our voices. He needs the energy that people can bring to hopefully and hopefully that vibration, that energy reaches Peter Hummelgaard in Denmark, and he feels it. And he feels that, you know, here is an environmental hero that has done so much good for the oceans and so much good for our planet. And I am potentially getting ready to send him to what could equate to be a death sentence in a prison cell in Japan. And so, again, we only have about a week to make a difference because Peter Hummelgaard has said he's going to make a decision by December 18th, and that's less than a week away. So, anybody listening to this, the time to act and the time to spread the message is now. We need these reverberations to happen now, so that hopefully they get back to Copenhagen, and that hopefully the government in Denmark feels the pressure and will make the right decision for Paul and for the environment. So yeah, I think you know, those things are what would really help Paul. And again, there's always that aspect of creativity. I mean, there could be things that other people are thinking that I'm not even thinking of that could potentially help Paul Watson. And you know, please, if Paul has meant anything to you in your life, or if you're moved by ocean conservation, I would encourage everyone to do something now because, again, Paul is 74 years old, and Paul has done a lot for us. And I think this is our chance to give back to Paul and show him what he's meant to us, and you know, all the hard work that he's done that some of us either can't do or, quite frankly, aren't willing to do. Put their lives on the line to save whales. So yeah, I think anyone listening to this, you know, however big or how small, it doesn't matter. Even if you just tell your mother or tell your best friend, hey, did you know that Paul Watson's in prison? That can have an effect, a ripple effect, and maybe somehow somebody that knows someone high up in the Danish government has a conversation that potentially frees Paul.
Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking out, for summarizing it from your point of view, like that, with these kind of aspirations, the kind of things you touch upon, up to energy. I want to add from my perspective, I think what I'm hearing is, you can put it like this, there's a lot of hope if we focus on a person that minister in Denmark is taking a particular decision. I would also say maybe there's other people who can make, as you say, a similar impact, though it might not be that visible. And it might feel, why or how could there be an impact? And I just want to say, we hear here countries have been involved, ministers, even higher representatives, and we were speaking about, or you were speaking about, several regions, let's say, in the world. I would just say, well, of course we can look at government, of course we can look at countries, but ultimately I would say, let's recognize again, it's us, it's people, it's the planet, and it's about the animals. And of course, this interview here, what we here ask and you respond and I ask, is about Paul, what he has done, the vision, and why you are involved, and why you're making basically this call in terms of listen. What I also said before, everyone should listen to this, the details, but ultimately, I would also say everyone should just listen in him, in herself, or by oneself, what feels right, what resonates with oneself in this case, in this situation. Because again, this is a person who took, as much as I can see, over decades, action for animals in the sea, which is ultimately about the environment. And the environment is why we all as humans should be recognizing that that is so essential for all our lives. And final point, I think it stinks somehow. This thing with the bombs, their stink bombs, this whole story, these things here is, sorry, a little bit too complicated. We should recognize, I think, again, people on all kinds of levels, how we best can live in this world. And it is challenging. And why is it so challenging? Everyone should ask this question to oneself, him or herself, and again, listen from within what feels right, what is, so to say, the next move to take potentially action for Paul or something else, whatever one feels is good. That would be just my thoughts. But maybe, again, still over to you, Charlie. Anything still to add?
No, I think everything that you said, is wonderful. And Paul has preached the importance of biodiversity. Every organism, every animal matters. And on this planet, one big ecosystem, we're all interconnected. I know that, humans have created technology and made all these advancements to try to remove themselves from nature. But what we are finding is that you can only do that so far. Nature will always come back. Global warming, a lot of the things that we're seeing today, we're starting to feel the consequences of some of our actions. Whales represent a key species in the oceans. And, Paul talks a lot about the importance of whales and fertilizing the oceans for phytoplankton. Phytoplankton create oxygen. Phytoplankton are a key part of the food chain in the oceans. So, we have a man who is trying to make sure that every living creature in the sea is still there for future generations to appreciate. And to your point, humans can only exist on this planet if we have a functioning ecosystem, a functioning planet. And it all revolves around the interconnectedness of all these different species, all the way down to the microorganisms, the bacteria, all the way up to the blue whale. We're all connected and we all matter. So the sooner humans realize that, uh, the more value they will place on these organisms, not just a dollar value or a monetary value, but a life-sustaining value. And that will change people's behavior towards animals and towards the environment. But Paul's a hero. Paul's at the forefront. Paul's in prison, and he needs our help. And anything anybody can do to help him right now is greatly appreciated.
Still, maybe as you said, 18th of December. And it's December, it's also some in the world will immediately recognize it's Christmas time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So with that, I would just call on everyone to reflect, to listen within, and to feel what feels good. And then from that, take the next step, make the next decision in life.